If you're having issues with your GLBP group whereby certain routers are not forwarding traffic as you expect them to, or even you have multiple AVGs that exist, you will want to verify that your group numbers are accurate, that there's no IP addressing mismatches, and that authentication has been successful for that GLBP group. When we analyze our group numbers, it's really important to realize that the group number identifies those routers that are going to work together as a virtual default gateway. And so therefore, if they're not configured for the same group, they're not considered to be part of that same virtual default gateway. So you want to be able to verify the group numbers. If we go over to R4 in our example here, we'll see from the output of show GLBP brief that we have group 43 configured. If we go over to R3 and issue the same command, show GLBP brief, we'll see also group 43 is configured. So we have consistency here amongst the group numbers. We can also verify the group number with the output of show GLBP. And it says up here that for Gigabit Ethernet 0/0, we're configured for group number 43 for GLBP. If we go over to R4, we'll see the same thing too, show GLBP. Again, group 43 has been configured on R4. So consistency in the group number is very important to make sure that we have those routers participating in that exact same group. In addition to that, since they're in the same group, they have to be using the same IP address as the virtual IP address. We do not want a mismatch here because their clients are configured with this virtual IP address. And if for some reason the router that the client is using goes down and another router takes over and that other router is using a different virtual IP address, then we are going to have an issue because that client is not going to get the MAC address or information it needs to successfully communicate with that router so it can send packets out of the subnet that the client is in. So looking at the output of show GLBP, we can see that for group 43, we're using the virtual IP address of 10.143.1, and on R3, we're also using the virtual IP address of 10.143.1. So this is the IP address that is configured on the client. So we need consistency across the board here. If these addresses are not accurate, then we are not going to get the desired results we want for our particular GLBP group. Authentication. Very, very important to make sure that we are not receiving GLBP packets from rogue devices. If we are and authentication is configured, then we'll be able to ignore those packets. We won't accept them because they do not pass authentication. So when we're dealing with GLBP authentication, what are we going to be dealing with? Well, let's see if we have authentication configured here. Let's look down through this GLBP configuration. I don't see any authentication configured right now in the output on R3. So let's go over to R4 and analyze the output of show GLBP. I don't see any there either. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure GLBP authentication right now. Interface Gigabit Ethernet 0/0. We'll type in GLBP, group number 43, authentication. So notice we have both the option of MD5 authentication and plain text authentication. Let's do MD5 authentication here. We have the ability to use keychains or key strings. I'm just going to use a key string, and we will use a key string of TSHOOT in this particular example. And as soon as I hit enter, we can see that there is bad authentication. And we received bad authentication from 10.1.43.3. So that's R3. Notice here as well that because of bad authentication, we cannot confirm that R3 has the ability to forward traffic for the MAC address associated with forwarder number 2. If we look back up here, we'll see that forwarder number 1, we were active for that. We were forwarding traffic sent to this virtual MAC address right here. And forwarder number 2 was R3, and it's sending traffic, it's forwarding traffic for this MAC address. But now, because authentication is failing, we have to become the forwarder for number 2 as well. However, if we go over to R3, look at this. We just became the active forwarder for group 43. We are forwarding as well for both MAC addresses now. Before, we were standby. We were not the AVG. We were listening as we were forwarder number one, or for forwarder number one. So we were not forwarding for this MAC address. We were forwarding for the other MAC address. We can see that right here. But let's take a look at the output now. Show GLBP. And we can see from this output that we are active. So we are the AVG for group 43. So we have 2 AVGs for group 43 because authentication was not successful. And we are the active virtual forwarder for both these MAC addresses. So 2 AVGs, 2 forwarders on both routers now. Or 2 AVGs and 4 forwarders in total between 2 routers. We have duplicates of everything and we do not want that. So it's important that authentication is configured appropriately. So interface, gigabit Ethernet, 0/0, GLBP, group number 43, authentication. And what did we use? We used MD5. We said we were going to use a key string, and that key string was what? TSHOOT. So now everything should just smooth itself out here. We can see that we are no longer going to be the AVG. We've gone from active to speak, and then eventually we should go into the standby state because there is no other router that is standby AVG at the moment. And when it comes to the listener, we can see that for forwarder number 1, so the MAC address associated with forwarder number 1, we are now in the listening state. We're not forwarding traffic for that MAC address anymore. If we go over to R4, wow, a lot of stuff was happening behind the scenes. A lot of bad authentication messages were appearing. But we can see here for forwarder number 2, we went back to being just in the listening state now. So everything smoothed itself out here. So it's really important to realize that that when it comes to having multiple AVGs or multiple devices forwarding for the exact same MAC address, we have issues in the environment. We have inconsistency. Traffic is not going to be deterministic. We're not going to get the flow of traffic that we want. So it's really important that our group numbers are accurate, our virtual IPs are accurate, and that authentication is successful. Because as we saw in the demo, authentication failures mean 2 AVGs or more. If we had 4 routers, we'd have 4 AVGs if authentication failed between all 4 of them. And then potentially after that, everybody's forwarding for every single MAC address, which is no good.